If you've spent any time on social media over the weekend, you have likely come across Pierre Poilievre's new video on Canada's housing crisis. Slick editing, well made. Right now it's got over 3 million impressions on X and over 180,000 views on YouTube. Here's a preview of what is in the video.
After generations of affordable and stable Canadian home prices, it now takes 66% of the average monthly income to make payments on the average single-detached Canadian house. Given that most of the remaining 34% of the family paycheck is taken up by taxes, there's literally nothing left for food and recreation. And that all assumes that you have enough for a down payment to get the mortgage in the first place. Saving up for that down payment in Toronto now takes an average of 25 years. Not long ago, you paid off a mortgage in that time.
Now, a common refrain you'll hear from Canadians who have become disillusioned with the state of politics in our country over the past few years, which frankly at this point is everyone, is that politicians only care about winning elections. They only care about staying in power. And if solving the problems that are faced by Canadians every single day might get in the way of winning elections, it might jeopardize their electoral success, then it's a pretty safe bet to assume that those problems aren't going to be solved anytime soon. And the way politicians usually figure all this stuff out is by using focus groups and public polling. But what happens when in poll after poll, year after year, the majority of Canadians fall on one side of a major issue facing the country? Let's call it maybe the biggest issue facing our country at the moment. And politicians from both the Conservative and the Liberal Party fall on the complete opposite side of the majority of Canadians, with no difference between both major parties. I'm of course talking about mass immigration, the main issue through which all other issues in this country stem from. The most obvious being Canada's housing crisis. Now, if you go looking for a difference between the Conservatives and the Liberals over mass immigration, you won't find anything at all. I find that to be strange, and quite honestly, concerning. And I think you should as well. But before we get into the video, drop a like in the video, help us out with subscribing to the True North YouTube channel, and the comment question for the episode is this: how many public opinion polls need to be published before Pierre Poilievre releases an immigration strategy? Let me know in the comments, and let's get into it. Here is some more of that Pierre Poilievre video on the housing crisis in Canada.
Canadian prices, which are so much higher than in other countries, are determined by supply and demand. We have the fewest houses per capita in the G7, even though we have the most land to build on. We have fewer houses per capita today than we did 8 years ago, as population has outgrown home building. Canada built fewer homes last year than it built in 1972, 50 years ago. Consider this. In 1972, Canada's population was 22 million, and we built about 230,000 homes. In 2022, Canada's population was 39 million, and we built about 220,000 homes. In other words, far more people, far less home building.
Of course, Poilievre gets some things right, the most obvious being that homes just aren't being built. Also, massive federal deficits and overspending have shrunk the value of the Canadian dollar through inflation. And because of that, the Bank of Canada has had to hike lending rates, causing a wave of cancelled home building projects. But for a brief moment there, Poilievre discussed supply and demand and Canada's spike in population. But instead of saying what every Canadian knows to be true, Poilievre just skipped the part about capping demand. And Canadians in the comment section of his video noticed that. End mass immigration. 1.2 thousand likes. Get out by stopping mass immigration. That is all. 1.6 thousand likes. This is a great documentary, and it's encouraging to see a future PM educating in a longer format than the usual rhetoric. There's one thing missing from this doc. More needs to be said about mass immigration. It's a huge factor in housing pricing. You can't avoid the topic. The Canadian dream of home ownership cannot die. Our children deserve what we had. We need a moratorium on mass immigration immediately. Now, this is where things start to get a little concerning. Since Poilievre became leader of the Conservative Party, he has refused to touch the immigration issue at all. Many of his commitments are exactly what you would expect to see from the Liberal Party. One of Pierre Poilievre's promises is that he will institute a blue seal test to get foreign workers credentialed in their professions within 60 days in Canada. But when it comes to lowering immigration into Canada, the best Canadians have received from Pierre Poilievre is a commitment to move away from set numbers and targets and instead tie immigration to demand here in Canada.
My policy, my common sense policy on immigration will be driven by the number of vacancies that private sector employers want to fill, the number of charities that want to sponsor refugees, and the families that want to reunite quickly with loved ones. Let's base it on common sense, not on Justin Trudeau's ideology and incompetence, and that's how we'll restore the immigration system that has, before his arrival, been more successful than any other immigration system on earth.
But that is not a commitment to lower immigration at all. In fact, the Poilievre government could simply just say that the Canadian economy requires more immigrants than what we are bringing in right now. Because of that, more will have to come. So saying that you will move away from set numbers and targets and instead tie immigration to demand is not really a commitment to lower immigration. Meanwhile, a new public opinion poll produced by Abacus Research shows that 67% of respondents, 67% of Canadians think immigration is too high, compared to just 2% that think immigration is too low. That number, 67% that think Canada's immigration targets are too high, is almost mirrored exactly by immigrants themselves. 62% of immigrants, according to Abacus data, also think that Canada's immigration targets are too high. And only 15% of respondents to this Abacus data poll said that they felt their community needed more immigrants. Only 15%. And here is the kicker when it comes to this Abacus data poll. 69% of Canadians who responded to this poll feel that new immigrants have a negative effect on the cost and availability of housing. Wow, go figure with that one. Talk about a common sense plan. And that was only from one poll, which just so happened to be published last week. At the end of October, Canada's longest running poll on immigration showed a sharp drop in the public's support over high immigration targets. According to BNN Bloomberg, some 44% of respondents now agree with the statement that there's too much immigration to Canada, compared with just 27% last year. Although those who disagree with that statement are still the majority, they now make up just 51%, the lowest since 1998. That's a decrease from 69%, previously the highest level on record. Or take this Nanos research poll commissioned by Bloomberg News back in August, which showed the exact same figures. 68% of Canadians surveyed said they believe increased immigration targets will either negatively impact or somewhat negatively impact the cost of housing. It's poll after poll where the results are the same, yet for some reason, the opposition in this country won't talk about the issue. So it's kind of strange that Pierre Poilievre can make a 15-minute video on the housing crisis and not mention immigration once, not even use the word immigration. And what's even weirder is that it's not just Pierre Poilievre who has refused to talk about immigration. It seems as though every single Conservative MP has been told to stay silent on the issue, or just to support more immigrants coming into Canada. Take, for example, the housing shadow minister for the Conservative Party, Scott Aitchison. He was asked a few days ago about this new poll, which shows that Canadians, 3 in 4 Canadians, think that high immigration targets are having a negative effect on the cost and availability of housing. What did Scott Aitchison say? We need more Canadians, and immigration is not the problem.
2/3 of Canadians are linking higher immigration levels to the housing crunch and worsening healthcare pressures in the healthcare system.
Well, there's no question that this government hasn't planned for anything. There's no question we need more Canadians to help us fund an economy that's struggling to find people to work. And so it's part of the problem. But this is another classic situation where you have a federal government that is long on photo ops and talking points and short on results.
But you believe that higher immigration levels are part of the problem that we're facing with housing right now?
I don't think they're a problem. I think that they're part of the situation. The situation is that we have a general lack of supply. We need more units, and we haven't been planning for more units for decades now. And this government's just finally starting to wake up to the fact that they've bungled the file.
And it's not racist or xenophobic to say that lowering immigration levels will help solve the housing crisis. It's basic mathematics. It's basic facts. In fact, Canada already did this to solve a housing crisis, a housing shortage in the 1970s. Canada cut back on immigration to solve the housing crisis back then. It's a basic supply and demand question. Canada had to get demand back in check with supply. In fact, I asked Pierre Poilievre this exact question a few months ago, if he was prepared to lower immigration targets in order to solve the housing crisis. Of course, he sidestepped the question and refused to talk about lowering immigration. In the 1970s, the Canadian government was able to solve the housing crisis by lowering immigration and building more homes. So far, you've refused to commit to cutting immigration targets, but would a Poilievre government adopt the same strategy that worked so well in the 70s to build more homes?
To build more homes, absolutely. In fact, in 1972, we built more houses than we built last year. Think about that. 50 years ago, we built more homes than we did last year. So let's do the math. In 1972, Canada's population was 2.2 million people. 22 million people. 22 million Canadians. We built 250,000 homes. Last year, our population was 39 million people, and we built 219,000 homes. So with nearly double the population, we're building fewer houses. And CMHC expects that we will build, this year, we're going to build 32% fewer homes.
Last month, True North's Lindsay Shepherd reached out to Pierre Poilievre's office to see if they would offer up their own immigration targets so Canadians could know if there's any difference between Liberals and Conservatives on the issue of mass immigration. Of course, Poilievre's office responded, but they refused to provide their own immigration targets. Instead, all they did was point True North to the direction of a previous Pierre Poilievre interview in which he says that he will tie immigration figures to demand. And as Lindsay Shepherd rightly points out, saying you're going to tie immigration to demand doesn't at all mean you're willing to actually lower immigration. In fact, it could just mean you're willing to raise immigration levels. From the way Poilievre's statement is worded, it sounds like he may prefer to scale up home building and healthcare worker hiring to keep up with Trudeau's immigration levels, or perhaps even increase them. Since we haven't been afforded an answer, we can only speculate. So what is actually going on here with Canada's Conservative Party? Immigrants themselves, 63% of them, according to Abacus data, think immigration targets are too high. Canadians in poll after poll have shown that they think immigration is negatively impacting the housing crisis. The demand for housing is way out of pace with supply, and the Liberals keep increasing immigration. The same thing, by the way, is happening in the United Kingdom. The fake Conservatives led by Rishi Sunak, who talk a big game on immigration, but instead have done absolutely nothing to solve it, are losing voters to new right-wing parties willing to actually address the issue. Tory fears mount over huge immigration driving voters to reform UK. Meanwhile, look no further than what just happened in the Netherlands. Geert Wilders, a man who has committed his career to stopping mass immigration and the Islamization of the Netherlands, has just won the Dutch elections in a shock victory. He recently sat down for an exclusive interview with Ezra Levant of Rebel News. And listen to what he says about the immigration question.
Other countries like Canada, the Conservative Party is pretty conservative and pretty freedom-oriented, but it still has an open borders immigration policy. In the United Kingdom, the Conservative Party open borders policy every day across the English Channel. What advice would you give to freedom-oriented conservative parties who are obviously afraid of losing the vote of new immigrants? What advice would you have for Canada or the United Kingdom?
Well, don't be afraid. First, don't be afraid. A lot of people will support you. Secondly, it's a totally misconception that the immigrants would disagree, because maybe for some people, surprisingly, the immigrants agree. Many of the immigrants agree. For in Holland, many of the immigrants, even many Muslims, voted for my party because they know that when there is too much influx of immigration, that the integration and the success for them will only diminish. So they also are in favor of less immigration. They know, they see what will happen with the housing, with the income, with the jobs, with everything. So surprisingly, it's not surprisingly, but surprisingly to many people, they are often our allies. They don't want more immigrants to come as well.
Conservatives have to stop acting scared over the issue. Stop being afraid of being called a racist. Immigrants will support you, Canadians will support you, but tackle the issue of the day and stop being afraid. Listen to what he has to say here. Now, despite having all the public data you could possibly want showing you that it is a safe and winning issue to talk about mass immigration, to be willing to lower these mass immigration targets. For whatever reason, the Conservative Party of Canada, who love to bill themselves as the common sense alternative to Justin Trudeau, just won't touch the issue. Do you find that strange, or is it just me? Let me know in the comments. My name is Harrison Faulkner, and this is Ratioed.